Welcome, everybody. Thanks for your patience. I wanted to introduce everybody. This is our first Playlist for Learning Challenge webinar. It's produced on behalf of the DML, the Digital Media and Learning Competition. This is our sixth competition, which is administered by Haystack with support from the MacArthur Foundation. I'm Cheryl Grant. I'm Director of Social Networking for the DML competition, and I'll be your host and your moderator for the next about 40 minutes or so. Before I introduce my guests, I just want to repeat that you can participate and ask questions. We'll do our best to thread them throughout the webinar, and if need be, we'll answer questions in a Q&A at the end. We do have some questions that I will be asking our guests that we want to make sure get out there so everybody understands a little bit how this is framed. So we'll do that, but please feel free to ask questions, and we'll work that into the conversation as we go along. So, our guest today, we worked very, very hard for. Jen Humke, Senior Program Officer at the MacArthur Foundation. David Theo Goldberg, who is Director at UCHRI at the University of California, the Humanities Research Institute, also the DML Research Hub and the DML Competition. Tim Cook, who's Partner Product Manager at LRNG. And if we can get him in, Rob English is going to join us. He's an Executive Creative Director and Cultural Strategist, Associates in Science, and he was with us. We hope he's going to come back. And then Kylie Larson, who's a research scientist at the Institute of Human Development and Social Change in New York University. I know we had them here for a bit, so we'll start, and hopefully by the time we get to questions for them, they will be back in. So we'll start with you, Jen. We're going to be talking a lot about connected learning today, so let's start by foregrounding the conversation with the work that the MacArthur Foundation has invested in over the last 10 years. Can you describe for us very briefly what connected learning is?
Sure. So, why don't I first start by saying a little bit about how MacArthur came to connected learning. So we have had this initiative in digital media and learning. It's about 10 years old. And over the years, we've invested about $200 million, mostly in research and design experiments, to really better understand how young people learn today, especially with digital media. And what emerged from that work is a new approach to learning that we call connected learning, that we think is the most appropriate way to design learning to meet the needs of kids growing up in a world that's highly networked and technology enabled, and producing knowledge at a pace that was unimaginable even when I was a kid. So that's a little bit of the background about MacArthur, and I can say more if more is needed, but why don't I jump in and say a little bit about connected learning. So as I was saying, it's an approach to learning that we think is the right one for kids today. It's based on a huge body of research and experimentation that we've supported over the last decade. And connected learning posits that there are three parts of a young person's life that matter most to them, and that we really need to think about them when we're designing learning for them. And that is their peer networks, that learning is fundamentally a social endeavor. Their interests, that I think we can all say the best learning happens when it's connected to things that we're interested in, and payoff in the real world. So kids need to be able to see that what they're learning is either going to help them perform better in school, or get a job or an internship, or do something really positive for their community. So in a nutshell, that is essentially what connected learning is. I can say more if more is needed.
Can you talk a little bit about why it's such a critical moment right now for connected learning?
Sure. So like I said, over the last 10 years, we've funded a lot of work, mostly research. We funded people to think about how to measure connected learning, and we funded a number of organizations to design and test learning experiences that are based on the principles of connected learning. But all of that has really happened at a very small scale. The programming that we funded, the prototypes that we funded, are exactly that, prototypes. They've been tested with a small number of kids, and we're really interested in thinking about how to bring some of those most promising interventions to scale. So the competition is really designed to help do that. We think that playlists, which really are the curriculum of the digital age, are a way to, our step towards scaling connected learning programs and practices. So I think folks may know that MacArthur is getting ready. We're in the process of winding down our initiative. And we recently provided support for a new organization called Collective Shift. And they're launching a new platform called LRNG, which is really designed to take connected learning to scale. We did that because over the last 3 to 4 years, MacArthur had been running a pilot really out of our office called Cities of Learning that was essentially the prototype for LRNG. And for lots of different reasons, the foundation it's not really the best place to incubate and especially to bring to scale those kinds of projects. So we helped to launch LRNG, which is really an early adopter of playlists. And one of the reasons why we've brought them in to partner in this project.
Great. Thank you, Jen. I'm gonna ask David a couple questions, building on what Jen was just sharing about the MacArthur Foundation and LRNG and connected learning. Can you talk a little bit about the goal of the current competition, Playlist for Learning? I think you're. Oh, there you go.
Hi, everybody. It's let me just back up for a moment before I respond directly to the question. It's a pleasure to have you all on board and to see that there's such worldwide scope to attendance here, from our neighbors up and down the 405 and 5 in Southern California, across the US, to places like Tanzania and Lithuania and France and so on. It speaks to the connectedness, I guess, in connected learning, right? Just as a backup. And just to stress that connected learning is not about the technology driving the learning so much as the technology enabling a conception of learning that is about social networking and peer-to-peer engagement, learning from each other, peers, and between generations and so on. So it's important just to stress that. I'm pretty sure this audience is quite familiar with that. The DML competitions, this is the 6th in relation to the Digital Media and Learning Initiative, is to open up challenges really at the edge of thinking about learning and learning in relation to connectedness. And if you look at particularly the last 2 competitions, the one on badges DML4 and the one on trust DML5, you'll see that we're concerned to open up challenging considerations around learning in order to get the connected community engagement about thinking at the edge about how to respond to those challenges of trust in the one case and badging in the other, to drive both a conversation and design work in relation to these challenges as they come up when we think about learning and connectedness. And it's in that spirit that DML6 is really concerned to once again challenge the community to think collectively across the community about how one scales connected learning and how one thinks about a notion like playlists in order to bring connected learning or further bring connected learning to scale.
Great, thank you, David. I think because we're a little strapped for time here, we may go over a little bit, but we want to make sure that we do get to some of the meat that people want to hear about the actual design pillars. So I'm going to skip through some questions. I feel like David and Jen both did a really good job of explaining some of the relationships. So let's jump down to talk to Kylie a little bit about the way, the language, some of the language that we're using to talk about playlists. Kylie, LRNG describes a playlist as and this, I'm guessing maybe Kylie will answer this, but it also could be Tim as well. The LRNG describes a playlist as a curated group of resources and XPs stitched together into a narrative around a common theme that results in a badge. So can you maybe talk to us a little bit about how we're using the word playlist and what this means in the context of designing?
Sure, I could. Tim, would you like to jump in there first? You might know a little bit more about the product, but I'm happy to do that as well.
Yeah, feel free to go ahead and just talk from the design perspective first.
Sure. So what I really love about Playlist is that it capitalizes on things that organizations have already been doing, but maybe didn't have vocabulary to really talk about. In the research I've been doing, so my team has been tasked with over the last 5 years documenting how connected learning is happening, how youth are experiencing connected learning, and what outcomes can be associated with connected learning and DML demonstration sites that MacArthur has funded in multiple cities across the United States. And what I think is great about Playlist is that it really makes learning visible. So it helps youth see how they can progress from something they might have a nascent interest in to becoming an expert, or at least to learning more about that particular interest area that they have. And I think maybe I've gotten a little bit lost from your question there, Cheryl. Sorry.
Well, maybe we should also, I know from watching some of the earlier webinars that LRNG has done, maybe we should share with our audience that Connected Learning has, like Jen said, has an associated research agenda, an intensive ethnographic study in the book, Hanging Out, Messing Around, and Geeking Out. So I think a lot of the people who are joining us are familiar with some of these resources, and I'm going to ask our team to drop some of those resources into the chat so people know where they can find that information. There was a really good Connected Learning research agenda report that can help explain some of the thinking and all of that, just in case there are people who are not as familiar. But maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how that research has inspired the LRNG platform, if it has, down to some of the language and some of the way, and if you want to go into talking about some of the design pillars, that would be really helpful too.
Sure, absolutely. And I should let you all know that the handbook that has all of this information in more detail will be released tomorrow, and we can post a link on the DML competition website so that you all will have direct access to it. So you don't feel like you have to just take all of my word for it. So really, connected learning is the core of what LRNG is trying to do. It's also got roots in other learning theories, but really we take very seriously this intentionality around bringing together peer networks, youth culture, interests, and opportunity. So when people are designing playlists and thinking about creating these connected learning experiences, we ask designers and educators to think about how to connect to youth passions or youth interest. How can you find ways to expose youth to new interest? How can you help them deepen existing interests that you have, that they already have? How can you create space for them to connect with other people who share those interests, whether those are supportive adults or other same age peers who can act as expert mentors or as co-learners trying to figure these things out together? It's also really important to create space for youth to create things and really be hands-on in their learning. So these learning experiences shouldn't be about memorization or regurgitation. They should really be about doing and creating and experiencing. And when all of these things come together and work really well, they should help youth unlock some sort of real world opportunity. Now that might be helping them see how they can take their learning and use it to become a professional in that field, how they might take their learning they've been doing around their interest area and then connect it to academic opportunity, either in their current high school career or middle school career, or what they'd like to do when they go to college. Or it could unlock an opportunity like shadowing someone who has a job that they would really like to do in the future. So that's kind of the background around the connected learning piece for the playlist and designing learning experiences. We're also drawing a little bit from Tamago, which is hanging out, messing around, and geeking out. And the idea there is just to create, excuse me, I have to cough, forgive me. It's really to create multiple entry points for youth. So what I really love about Tamago is how it taps into the ways that youth engage with digital technology and with learning experiences more broadly. And we've tried to build on that work to push educators and playlist designers to think critically about how they can create multiple levels of engagement for youth when they're coming onto the platform. So how can your playlist create space for youth to simply hang out with other kids or other teens and spend time with them? How can it create space for them to play and experiment with tools in a really low stakes way so they don't feel pressure or concerns about failure, because that's a thing that teenagers often worry about. They don't want to put their products out there until they're ready. And then how can you really help them deep dive into that interest area once they've decided that they have a passion for it? And how can you connect them to mentors or professionals in that interest area who can help them develop, a term I really like is a better sense of their potential self. So who they could possibly be if they want to follow this interest pathway to its end.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I think for people who are getting ready to design, that handbook is going to be a great resource. We've seen some early versions, and it nicely breaks down everything. And I do also want to say here, we're going to ask, we have a question for both Tim and Kylie, but we do want to say that on dmlcompetition.net, we just added some examples for people. These are not prescriptive. They're just hypothetical examples just to give people an idea about how you might think about shaping some of these. And I think Mandy is going to drop that resource into the chat so people can take a look at those examples. And again, these are just hypotheticals based on some of the types of programming that we've seen in connected learning, how they could be adapted for playlists. So with that, I'm going to toss to either Tim or Kylie, if you could maybe talk about what are some of the keys to designing successful playlists. That would be helpful for our listeners.
Sure, I'll jump in here. And Kylie, feel free to add to this. But for me, the exciting aspect about playlists is that we've been talking about connected learning for a long time. But I think the hope with LRNG is we're building tools to connect learning resources to experiences, to connect local learning experiences to digital learning experiences, and sort of cross-pollinating the wealth of opportunities that exist in person and online. And so for me, sort of the main key or the primary in designing a playlist and designing a really good playlist is one that contains a lot of different types of elements, right? So potentially collaborations across multiple organizations and containing content that is both digital and in person, really capturing the breadth and the nuance of the paths towards a learning goal that learners are already taking, and sort of mimicking that in terms of the playlist design by having a real diversity of content.
Great, and I just want to say we get comments and questions from a couple different streams here, and I'm just noticing. I do want to stress, as far as the competition goes, that this is not. People can create playlists for their own organizations on their own websites or their own platforms. And part of the requirement is that people put their playlists on the LRNG platform. However, most of the things that we have seen in connected learning can easily be adapted to a playlist that you put on your platform. So this is very agnostic in terms of the design principles. We think these design principles, because LRNG is a leader in this, have a lot of input here, but we just want to stress that this is intended to be something that also works and benefits for your organization. David, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, consistent with LRNG without being restricted to LRNG, I think would be a shorthand way of saying that.
Great. And if people have questions about that at all, feel free to add those in the chat.
I just want to ask, just to offer something. This is Rob. I'm on the audio, but I'm not.
Great.
I wasn't able to connect back in through video.
Great. Go ahead, Rob.
But I just wanted to present something. You know, we're really, when we're talking about connected learning, you know, we're talking about LRNG, and I think a lot of it is being covered. But you know, just to really go through some really pointed aspects of it that I want to underline. I think, you know, what we're talking about with the benefits of the knowledge of connected learning and sort of the promise in that pedagogy is really empowerment, and empowering young people from a psychological standpoint to feel as though they are in the driver's seat of their learning life. So when we, a big part of the Tamago aspect and the hanging out, geeking out, messing around, the real need of that is really allowing them to feel as though they are in control and sort of driving that learning experience. So a lot of, from a design point, thinking that, we've tried to incorporate into this work is really making sure that, that the communications, the activities and things feel as though they are organic and connect to the user. They feel relatable to the users. And then that ecosystem that's being pointed to, and really allowing them to get connected to those real world and digital experiences in a way that is organic. So the importance being put around really being able to create experiences in a way that young people will actually feel excited to do, and walk them into the space where we're allowing them to be driven by their passions, and discover their passions, share them and connect them with their peer groups and their friends with those experiences, and then those actually leading to some kind of tangible outcomes, even if it's, if it's from a badge or from an actual experience or opportunity, it actually leading to a tangible outcome. I just wanted to speak to that, just in the thinking and really underlining that piece of, empowering those young people. At the heart of the playlist, and connected learning in general, it's a really important thing to kind of keep in mind in the design of these things.
I'm so glad you said that, Rob. That was one of our questions for you. So thank you for answering that so well. And I also want to say too, especially for the badge piece, that was one of the big takeaways for a lot of our Badges for Lifelong Learning grantees, is that co-designing not just the experiences with the youth, but also thinking about what the badge means and what it could lead to, or the value of that, also turned out to be a very important piece. So thank you for mentioning all of those with your answer.
Great.
Kylie or Tim, do you want to add anything to that?
I did quickly. I just wanted to say that what I think is so great about this is that so many organizations already do this so well. They know how to connect with youth. They know how to create really great learning experiences. I've seen them do it. I've worked with some amazing educators. I've researched how they've implemented connected learning, how they've created their learning experiences. And this gives them a chance to really grow their work, to scale it, to spread it in a way that might not be possible otherwise. So that's where I get really excited, is seeing the great work that's already happening when it can be coupled with a platform like this can actually really scale and spread.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add something about playlists? Playlists are part of our culture. I mean, we see it obviously in music, the most obvious, but also, there's a way in which gaming can be understood to incorporate playlisting as an arranged and sequenced set of experiences, in our case in relation to learning and specifically connected learning. But insofar as they are arranged and sequenced, they can also be rearranged and resequenced. And it's an important feature of playlisting that one can dip in and remix and reorder, and in relation to interests and driving passions and concerns and so on. So it's a flexible and pliable sort of model or platform by which to think about how one can best optimize learning experiences across a very broad range of examples.
I think that, thank you, David. That could also tie in a little bit this one question from our listeners, and I will throw it out there, and whoever wants to answer this, if we could explain how playlists connect with concrete learning experiences, for example, an after-school program, what that means.
Anyone?
It might help to take a look at the examples. We tried to think about different ways that you might want to consider this. And since there was a pause in answering this, I'll jump in and just say, sometimes it could be a festival where you're bringing together people who have the same interests and passions. It can be an internship that has been prearranged that might fold back into the organization. There's different ways that people have thought about this, and it kind of goes back to Rob and Kylie's point about co-designing with youth and working with the organizations about what value that will have to the youth that you're designing for.
We're publishing on the DMLcompetition.net website a set of 8 exemplars, just as a way of exemplifying how one might think about different ways of developing and applying playlists for learning across a range of domains. So it would be worthwhile to take a look at those just to get a sense of how they might apply and operate.
And to build on those points, I think that there's a lot of ways playlists can be used. It's a pretty generic structure in the same way that badges are, and therefore a pretty powerful one. You can use a playlist as a way to craft the curriculum or the syllabus for a program, sort of internal to a program. You can use a playlist to forge connections between multiple programs so that when a learner sort of completes maybe a robotics unit in school, they see it jumping off point from to continue following their interest, continue following their passion to another program that's maybe online or in person and across town. Or you can use a playlist as a curatorial tool, right? Not for original content per se, but to stitch together a lot of pre-existing interesting content from across the web, across your city, capturing and distilling the wealth of really amazing resources that are out there, but making them make sense for the learner in a really curated and comprehensive scope and sequence, so that when the learner asks the question, how do I learn X, right? You can say, well, here's a playlist I created that is the answer to that question. Because when you type, how do I learn X into Google, it does not give you a good answer.
Thanks, Tim. This sort of goes into our next question. This is I'm sorry, I'm just seeing the questions. I don't know who has asked it, but thank you for this question about providing local experiences. We do talk about local and global experiences. And would an experience connected to a specific locality be considered too narrow a proposal for the competition? Because this is tied to the competition and some of the examples that we gave, I will interject, and please anybody feel free to add to this, that if you have something that is grounded in your local area, you may not want to tie participation in that to your badge per se. It might be an optional piece of it, or a suggested or recommended, or this is how we are doing it. Obviously, another organization can easily work out their own. But David or anybody, Jen, maybe, do you want to talk a little bit about how we're conceiving of local and global in the context of the competition?
Sure. So this competition really is about developing expertise around playlists. We think that playlists are an opportunity to bring some of these really promising connected learning activities to scale. But really the goal, whether it is a set of playlists that really only extend to a small community, that's a totally valid set of activities to propose for this competition. So, we've even seen some examples in some of the prototypes that we funded over the last 10 years, where in a specific geographic location, and I'm thinking specifically about New York, there have been a set of organizations that have worked together to design a curriculum that allows youth to move from organization to organization within New York to develop expertise. In the case that I'm thinking about, it's in media production. So, but it could very well be that you design a playlist that's specific to your geographic location. It's made available through LRNG, and other geographic locations can build upon your playlist to develop activities for their local youth. So, yeah, it's a competition that is designed both for collaborations that are working locally and those that are working internationally.
I would just add to that the stress is on connectedness in relation to learning, no matter where the location or local area or locale is, so that as one's thinking about developing a playlist or set of playlists for a local community or a school district or an set of after-school programs, insofar as one's making available the possibility of connected learning across those connected to the specific community involved, that becomes a driving consideration.
And maybe you could follow up, Jen or David, about what you mean by scale. This is one of the questions from our listeners. What does that mean, and what would be a best case for that?
Wow, that's a very good question. I mean, so one of the reasons why MacArthur is supporting this competition is because we've been supporting connected learning, the development of connected learning activities for a while, and all of those activities really happen at a very small scale. And we have evidence to show that there have been positive outcomes for youth at that small scale. We also very much believe that connected learning is the best approach for all youth, and we want to make these activities available more broadly. So whether that means scaling to other youth in your city or your region, or scaling, making your activities available in a way that's appropriate for youth internationally, I think we're thinking about it at all levels. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I would add by linking it to another question in the chat box, and that is, what is the strategy in relation to adult learning? We think of connected learning across all generations, from birth to however it is one ends life, right? And learning takes place all the time across those multi-generational sets of folks. And so one can imagine playlists in a university setting, in a local book club kind of thing, just a very wide range of applications. And playlists are equally available to drive learning across those multi-generational sites and between generations, of course.
And, I would also add that in our experience over the last 10 years, we've heard a lot from organizations that provide learning experiences in the out-of-school space, that it's really difficult to figure out how to reach more youth. That usually scale happens through schools. And this competition, of course, is open to schools and districts as well. But we think that the playlists and platforms like LRNG are an opportunity to scale out-of-school learning activities to more youth.
I think, just to speak to, wanting to have and us looking to develop more of an expertise on, creating playlists and what that could be like. I totally defer to the team as far as what is exactly acceptable. But I think at the heart of it, one thing that's, we're really trying to do is to capture, what's a really cool and interesting way to learn something. What's a really cool way to learn something that's not so linear, that's not so one-dimensional. How can you, whatever it is, if it could, it could be from, something that's really related to school, or, mathematics or some, traditional subject, to, what it would be like to have, work-related skills or baking. It really doesn't matter what it is the exercise is trying to teach, but it's about it's about how it's trying to teach it, how you can design an experience that is multidimensional, that combines sort of the pluses and the promise of connected learning, in that it feels like it's passion driven. It combines those digital experiences, so things that you would find on the web if you maybe Googled a subject, but it sort of weaves it all together, that with the out of world or community or local experiences. It weaves it all together in a way that really just brings home knowledge of something. I think it's like the act of sort of putting it all together and thinking through an exciting way to learn something. Like that's really sort of the spirit of what it is we're trying to capture. So if that's happening, it's something that's sort of localized to a market or a city or a neighborhood, that's okay. Because I think we're, ultimately the goal is to really try to learn about, well, what are some of the best ways to approach doing this? And, part of the competition being really wanting to get some inventive thinking and see how that is really approached by everyone who participates.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rob. I'm gonna move quickly through the questions here because I know we're running out of time, and we probably will go over, and this is going to be archived and will be put up on DML competition as well as Haystack, and maybe LRNG has a place for that as well. And we'll do this again. So I am going to move through to the next question. And this question is under the DML competition requirements. It's mentioned that proposals should demonstrate that they are compatible with the LRNG platform. So maybe we can talk, and I'm not sure who best to answer that, but can we talk a little bit about what that means in practice?
Sure. I mean, all that means in practice right now is that the content you develop is set up in such a way that it's sort of parceled out as individual learning experiences, whether those be digital or local or both, hopefully. And those digital or local experiences are put together into a sequence, and that sequence results in one digital badge. In terms of a specific sort of data format or some such, there's not hard and fast requirements. On the platform, obviously, we have specific fields and properties that you're supposed to fill out for each learning experience and for each badge, but those are not very restrictive, are fairly general, and sort of point to things like description, learning criteria, level of engagement, information that you would probably have already when you're designing your content. So there's not a specific metadata standard for playlists because it's a pretty new technical idea. There is a sort of a specific information behind badges. So obviously, you may know that we're following the open badges standard in terms of the digital badges that will come at the end of the playlist. So any badges that are created should follow that standard specification. But we can provide some more detail. Obviously, sort of the best way to get familiar with what information you'll need in order to populate the experiences on the platform would be to check out and use the platform. And we can provide you access with that when necessary.
And just for anybody who might have joined after we started, we are going to have a handbook. LRNG is going to have a handbook that will be available tomorrow. And I think we can send that to the list of people who participated. So we'll make sure that you get that information. If not, it will go out to all the same list that we sent the webinar announcement to. And also to let people know that Tim has done a really good webinar on an early release demo. I'm sure things have changed a little bit. And there is also a webinar coming up on Friday with LRNG. So you'll get to see the platform and ask some of these technical questions in a little bit more depth.
And I'll mention very specifically the partner handbook that will be released tomorrow actually has a step-by-step walkthrough of every single field on what it takes to fill out the form to create an experience, an XP on the platform, as well as a badge and a playlist. So if you want to get into the weeds on each specific piece of data you need, you can check it out there. But the main requirements is just you need to have great learning experiences, put them into a sequence, and have an achievement in a badge at the end.
And we will drop links into the chat with links to Tim's webinar for April 1st, and also I think there's a link to the archived one as well. And you can see some of the other questions that people have asked in that one to help. So let me make sure I'm following along the question arc here. And Tim, maybe you can answer this as well. Can you talk a little bit about LRNG's business model this idea of ownership, who's going to own the playlist content that's created and who has access to the playlist.
Sure. I actually answered that already in the private chat to the individual, but I'll mention it broadly for everyone. So all the playlist content that you create, I believe the requirement is that for the DML competition that it's published under an open license. So the public sort of owns it, right? And anyone can use it and remix it and share it. LRNG does not sell learning content on the platform. All of the content that you create is free for youth and educators to take advantage of. We're just a tool for you to sort of stitch your content together, showcase it, and publish it to the public. And I think that's it. I mean, in terms of the sort of long-term business model of LRNG, we're looking towards a membership model in that we want to have our partners sort of work with us to financially support the ongoing development of the platform and the tools that we're building as a community to support connected learning. Over the next 6 months, the work will be free, and I believe the DML competition, if you're awarded the grant, the platform will be free for you, and you'll basically have a free membership to use the platform for a very, very long time, basically as long as you need to publish your content and have it hosted for, I think, at least a couple of years. I'm not sure what you guys decided on the final terms there. But.
You know, Tim, can I ask you to clarify something? Because organizations will actually retain the copyright to their content. It's just the playlist itself that is openly licensed. So I don't want organizations to be concerned that they have IP that is going to be made available publicly if they publish it as part of an LRNG playlist.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the complete terms of your grant agreement.
Maybe David, you might have more insight, or maybe this is something that we need to make sure in a follow-up webinar that we have more information about.
Yeah, I think we can spell out in a later webinar, but what Jen has pointed to is essentially the baseline agreement.
Thanks everyone. There was a question, maybe this is a good segue for Tim. Sorry, Tim, we're really putting you on the spot here. We have another question about badges, which is what we were going to move to next anyway. Can badges be issued via a different platform in the first instance, so not through LRNG, with the possibility of being exported to LRNG or any other open badge compatible platform or backpack?
I love talking about badges. I'm not sure what the phrase "the first instance" means in that question. But so the way that will work is, in order to publish your content on LRNG, you would also have to publish a badge, which is saying to the public, whichever your public is, saying to them, this is a badge you can earn, and you can earn it through LRNG. But you could also publish that learning content and or that badge on another platform as well. I'm not sure what the DML competition is saying about where you have to publish your things first. Potentially you could publish your badge and content somewhere else as long as it was published on LRNG within the time frame for the competition. I'm not sure. But yes, LRNG is open badges compatible. So we're aligned with the metadata standard and are even pushing that standard forward by supporting the Badge Alliance in that work. So any badge that's earned on LRNG will be able to be exported and shown on any other open badges compatible platform.
And if that is a question about who is issuing the badge, Tim, I'll just let you answer. I feel like I understand how it works, but I'll let you understand. It's not LRNG that's issuing the badge, correct?
Correct. The issuer of the badge would be whoever created the badge. So all of the content that you're creating, you are the one who has the power to issue it, not LRNG or anyone else, unless, of course, you provide access to that badge to another organization that you want to issue it on your behalf. And
for people who are just coming into the conversation about badges, the DML competition and the MacArthur Foundation Haystack, we've done a lot of work around badges, and probably the best way to jump into the conversation at this point is through the Badge Alliance website, and maybe in future webinars, if there's a need, we can focus a little bit more on badges. There's some assessment issues in there, and good questions, and some interesting design considerations when introducing badges to lifelong learning and out of school learning. But those are all good questions. I am going to just point out we are over our hour, but willing to keep going as long as our guests have a little bit of time. Everybody nodding their head. Okay, so we can keep going here with some questions. Let me see, next questions here. I feel like Tim has answered questions about the business model. Is there anything about interoperability that you want to talk about, Tim, or can tell people in terms of the playlist interoperability? Is that really just about chunking the information? And is this really, are we talking about a copy-paste kind of thing? Or their design?
Yeah, I sort of mentioned that a little bit. Because a playlist as like a data object is not really a thing yet. Yeah, it really is just taking the learning experiences, the activities you've created, maybe even offline or in a Google Doc or wherever you're doing your curriculum development, content development, and putting them into the forms on the LRNG platform. In terms of being interoperable with any other platform, it would require there being another platform that had a playlist as an object on the platform. If you find one of those, let me know so that we can build some interoperability and start to experiment with that. I am very interested in thinking about how we sort of keep pushing on this interoperability question so that we can connect learning across platforms, not just in terms of badges, but in terms of experiences, in terms of resources, and in terms of playlists. But that's sort of on the distant horizon. So for now, it's kind of a manual interoperability, I suppose. Not because we don't want to, but because there's no real necessity to be interoperable in terms of playlists, because we're the only platform who sort of offers that functionality.
You know, can I add something that I think is really important to keep in mind is that we're going into this competition knowing that we don't know all the answers about playlists. And the reason why we're holding this competition is that we want to identify a community of people who can help us think through what a playlist is, what it means for a platform like LRNG, where there might be other opportunities. And so this competition is going to help shape what playlists are and their impact on platforms and their use out in the world. We don't have all the answers right now.
And that's
I also wanted to just take a second. I just wanted to take a second to also double down on the question about the business model. So I mentioned that, you know, in the future we'll be pursuing a sort of membership model. But an important note there is that LRNG is a not-for-profit. So the membership model is just to support our costs to continue to develop the work. It doesn't sort of have any profit incentive in terms of selling content or things like that. So as we pursue membership, it's with the motivation solely to continue to support all of our partners and sort of build this movement and operationalize connected learning as a nonprofit.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too, that part of becoming involved in the competition, we do programming with the grantees after that will create this community to talk a little bit more about the design principles and what we're learning. So that is just building on what Jen said. And I do want to point, there's one question I looks like I overlooked, and I just want to make sure we squeeze it in here before we end the webinar. And this is probably for you, Jen. The competition says existing connected learning programming. How could you, and could we clarify what we mean by existing?
Sure. I did answer this online, but I will say a couple more words about it for everyone. So over the years, MacArthur has funded organizations to develop connected learning content through the Hive Learning Networks, through the Learning Labs. So this competition is open to those organizations that have already created connected learning content with MacArthur funding, but it's also available to other organizations who may not have received funding from MacArthur in the past and may not be part of the connected learning community, but are doing connected learning related, providing connected learning related activities to youth. So yeah, the competition is open to everyone. What we mean by already existing connected learning content, I think in that specific place in the open call refers to the content that we funded through MacArthur demonstration sites.
We do have one more question, and I think we'll look back over the questions that people have asked both in the chat and the ones that I have received, and make sure and look for themes. It may be that we do another one that's a little bit more specific to badges or some of the questions if we see a theme arising, but I want to be conscious that we are pushing way over our time due to technical difficulties, and we're probably going to wrap pretty quickly. But I do want to include this one question about whether or not a group can be part of more than one submission. And I'm not sure who wants to answer that. I guess David.
I just actually answered it online. Okay. You can be a partner on more than one application, but a PI on only one. So, you know, if you're pulled in by another proposal into there, of course, then you'll be competing against yourself in some sense. So you might want to assess your chances, both increases and decreases your chances, depending on how you pass it. But you can participate in multiple applications or proposals. But as I say, principal investigator to whom the money would come were you to be awarded, only on one, literally your own.
To that is that I hope people got this in the emails we sent out, that if you are a former DML winner, that you can be a PI again and for this competition, which is different than years past.
Exactly.
Same thing with people who have received funding from the DML initiative as well. So we are close to going 10 minutes over. So does anybody want to add anything before we wrap up here?
I'd just like to stress Jen Humke's remarks about the experimental aspect of the competition, and that you know, we really are looking for creative ideas. I mean, that's the point of the challenge in relation to playlists. And as Jen said, we don't know everything about playlists. We don't pretend to know everything about playlists. And we're looking to the community around DML and connected learning really to push the button in as creative ways as you can get. And that's what the competition is about.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for a great conversation. We will have a full video recording. Granting no technical difficulties with that, we'll have that posted as soon as possible. So this wraps up our first Playlist for Learning webinar, and hopefully the conversation is not going to end here. We do have lots of material that we're putting on the Haystack as well as on the DML competition blog, and we'll be having conversations about this in future webinars. So remember to mark your calendar for Friday, April 1st, no joke. Tim is going to be doing a webinar on the LRNG youth aspect in particular. And we've dropped that into the chat, so you have a link to that. And we'll also be posting, I guess I already said this, on the DML competition blog and on Haystack and on Twitter with the DML playlist hashtag if you want to find us there. Let's keep the conversation going. It's one thing about the DML community is you're so good at collaborating and reaching out, and hopefully you're going to be natural at scaling these ideas as well through playlists. So thank you, everybody, and thanks for a great conversation.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.